Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next in our sessions of Sociology 111. Today we are going to be covering Chapter 7, Media. This is the session for Week 5 of the Fall 2014 semester. So, the mass media. Okay, when we talk about mass media, specifically what we're talking about there are forms of media designed to communicate information to large numbers of people. So we'll be examining sociological perspectives on the media. We'll be thinking about our audience. Who is the audience for media? Looking at the media's global reach. Talking about social policy and mass media, the right to privacy. Some of the questions we'll be trying to address: why are the media so influential? Who benefits from media influence and why? How do we maintain cultural and ethical standards in the face of negative media images? So, as I said, mass media, print and electronic means of communication that carry messages to widespread audiences. When we talk about media, media is anything designed to communicate information. Clay tablets, all the way up to Facebook pages. But when we talk about, with technology changing what we do with media. Now, when we talk about mass media is any format of media designed to communicate to widespread audiences, to a large number of people. That's kind of the difference there. New forms of mass media have changed people's viewing and listening habits. Technology is consistently changing the way that we consume media. There's this idea of what's called cultural convergence, flow of content across multiple media, and the migration of media audiences. For example, if you're watching a TV show and they mention a particular person, you whip out your smartphone to look up more information on that person. You go to the Wikipedia page online. That's what we're talking about with cultural convergence. Different forms of media really kind of looking at the same type of content, and then media audiences following along as they go from format to format. So when we look at this table right here, 7-1, and you will find this is not actually in the book. The table that's in the book is slightly different. I'm not quite sure what's going on here. Some of this is duplicated. It's supposed to begin with what are called omnivores. 8% of American adults constitute the most active participants in the information society, consuming information, goods, and services at a high rate and using them as a platform for participation and self-expression. Following that is the connectors at 7%, surround themselves with technology and use it to connect with people and digital content. They get a lot out of their mobile devices and participate actively in online life. Lackluster veterans would be the next category, and what we're doing here is this is actually what comes before this half over here. This should be lackluster veterans. 8% of American adults make up a group who are not at all passionate about their abundance of modern ICTs, feel like the intrusiveness their gadgets add to their lives, and not many see ICTs adding to their personal productivity. And then we would have productivity enhancers. 9% of American adults happily get a lot of things done with information technology, both at home and at work. And then we get to the mobile centrics. 10% of the general population strongly attached to their cell phone and take advantage of a range of mobile applications. Connected but hassled. 9% of American adults fit into this group. They have invested in a lot of technology, but the connectivity is a hassle for them. Then there are the inexperienced experimenters. 8% that have less ICT on hand than others. They feel competent in dealing with technology and might do more if they had more. light but satisfied. 15% of the adult population have the basic of information technology but use it infrequently, and so it does not register as an important part of their lives. Then we have the indifferents, 11% that have a fair amount of technology on hand, but it does not play a central role in their daily lives. And then off the net, 15% of the population, mainly on the other side of what we would call the digital gap, the digital divide. They don't have the technology, and they really are not connected to the modern information network. I'm sorry about this particular chart, this particular table not being correct in the PowerPoint slide, but you can take a look at it in your textbook on page 138. Okay, functionalist view of the media. What are the functions of media? The media is there to entertain, socialize, enforce social norms, confer status, and promote consumption. It may act as a desensitizing narcotic. Now, the idea behind narcotizing dysfunction is that when people are shown certain things too many times, they get to the point where it no longer registers with them. But initially, of course, from the functionalist view, media is there to entertain. It also is an agent of socialization. It's one of the big agents of socialization. It conveys information about social norms, also enforces those social norms, reaffirms proper behavior, conferral of status. Mass media confers status on people, organizations, and public issues. If you look at table 7-2 on page 139 of your textbook, you see how this happens with magazines. People magazines, Time magazines, Person of the Year. People are the 50 people to watch kind of thing. You can see that a number of magazines do that. And then, of course, promoting consumption. We are a consumer society, and the media does promote consumption. So when we talk about it as an agent of socialization, it increases social cohesion by presenting a common view of culture. Plays a significant role in providing collective experience for members of the society. Discussing the latest episode of X TV show around the water cooler. Everybody watches Big Bang Theory, or everybody's watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or everybody's watching Big Brother, or Survivor, or whatever it may be. But making sure that you can participate in that discussion is part of being a member of society, and then the idea of having that collective experience when you come in and you say, did you see what happened on X TV show last night? Now, there are some problems with this in that television sometimes may be used as a babysitter, and so how are children being socialized if they're watching TV instead of interacting with their parents? And what about violent programming and the impact it may have on viewer behavior? How are we being affected by the media we're consuming? Enforcer of social norms. It reaffirms proper behavior, as I mentioned. It may play a critical role in human sexuality. When we see the ideals of what it means to be sexy, what it means to be attractive, what it means to be kind of desirable, oftentimes this is shaped and reinforced by the media. But innovative uses of new media may also have positive consequences as well. Media can be used as an educating tool. A show like Sesame Street has taught generations of kids at this point in time. But when it first was thought of, well, that was very innovative because TV was just there to entertain. Well, no, we can actually do other things with it. So, conferral of status as well. Singles out one person or issue, making it significant. News coverage right now in sports, for example. There's a huge debate going on over athletes and domestic violence. And so the names that we're hearing constantly are Ray Rice, Adrian Peterson, and now Hope Solo. And so there are horrible things going on all the time, but what the media chooses to cover makes it significant for us. Of course, we have this promotion of consumption. Saturday morning cartoons. I remember watching them when I was a kid. They're still around. This is one of the places where children see a lot of advertisements. But 20,000 ads a year. In fact, advertising to children has become an important part of marketing campaigns for manufacturing companies and for businesses in general. Disney markets to children. Commercials, of course, product placements, when you see it in the movie as well. Of course, now when you go to the movies anymore, it's not just product placement. Now you get to watch commercials in the movie too. Brand loyalty. It's not just about getting the kids to buy one product. It's about, and this is controversial, but it's about getting kids to identify and to incorporate almost into their self-identity particular brands of things. I need to have this brand of clothing. I need to have this brand of food. I need to have this brand of videos, whatever it may be. But it supports the economy, informs and underwrites media. There is a new type of advertising going on right now. You may have run across this if you read online journals, online magazines. They are now creating advertisements that are designed to look like news articles. You have to read the fine print very carefully to understand that this is an advertisement, or maybe a video that talks about a specific thing and tells you, this is, and it makes it look like a news article, but it's actually advertising a particular product. This is a fairly new phenomenon as well. Okay, I mentioned narcotizing dysfunction, right? Narcotizing dysfunction, essentially, it provides such massive amounts of information that audience becomes numb and fails to act on the information. This happened to a number of people and became an interest of social researchers really right around, I would say, September 11th, 2001, September 12th, September 13th. I remember where I was, what I was doing, the first time I saw the footage of the plane slamming into the towers and the towers falling. The 1,000th time, I thought, I'm not saying it was any less of a horrific incident, but by then I began thinking, when are they going to stop showing this and moving on? Recently, on his Real Time with Bill Maher mentioned the idea of this particular phenomenon when he talked about ISIS and the beheadings they have done. He was doing it, of course, in a facetious fashion for comedic effect, but he essentially said, Anderson Cooper tells us not to watch this violent image, it's too graphic, and then proceeds to show it 100 times in a row, to the point where people just become numb to it and fail to react to it. He was actually going in a different direction with it, but that is one of the things that will happen when you show something multiple times. It just becomes a numbing, or the multiple viewings of it become a numbing effect, have a numbing effect. Okay, so that's kind of the functionalist view on media. Now, conflict looks at it a little differently. Really says that media reflect and exacerbate divisions of society and the world. The media reflect essentially social norms and social inequality. Okay, one way that this happens is there are 6 corporations that control almost all the media in the United States of America. There are perhaps, and let's be generous and say there's a board of directors of 50 people at each of these 6 companies, okay? That's roughly, say there's 50 people at each company that makes decisions on what gets produced and what doesn't get produced. It may be higher. Let's be generous. Let's say there's 300 people at each company, okay? So when we multiply 300 by 6, 1,800 people deciding essentially what gets viewed by or what gets produced for consumption for 300 million people. Now, there's a broader range of people that influence what gets produced in media than just those. But when we talk about gatekeeping, we're talking about a small number of people controlling what gets produced and released for the larger public to view and to read, essentially to consume, to listen to. Media material must travel through a series of checkpoints before reaching the public. And, you know, you think, well, but we've got shows like American Idol, America's Got Talent, where America gets to vote who wins, right? That may be true. But by the time America gets to vote, hasn't the field really been narrowed down to the people that those 3 or 4 judges think are good enough to go through? That's just another form of gatekeeping. It's less dominant on the internet. The internet is a little bit more level playing field, although net neutrality is under attack right now. Large media companies are trying to create a division within the internet where if you have money, you can pay for higher speed internet. This is something that's going on with the FCC right now. But gatekeeping still remains less dominant. If you start a blog, it's possible to attract followers. Twitter, you can begin attracting followers. Facebook, you can self-publish content on Facebook. The internet does reduce gatekeeping. However, the internet is not without restrictions already, and should this particular new idea get pushed through, companies would be able to pay to have higher speed, their content streamed to you at higher speeds. Okay, we can also think about the idea of media monitoring. This is public watchdog groups, essentially. People who are looking at the content produced in media in order to sort of police it and see if they can't influence it. But media monitoring has been expanded to include monitoring individuals' media usage and choices without their knowledge. Really, it used to be just taking a look at public interest groups, taking a look at content being produced and aired over channels and then expressing their displeasure, maybe through boycotts and things like that. When we think about the government getting involved in this, right now, of course, everybody's probably heard of the metadata gathering. They're not looking at the content of emails and stuff like that, but they are monitoring where emails come from, how many emails are being sent. They're gathering large amounts of metadata on people's communication. They also have come under fire for illegal wiretaps and things like that. So there's media monitoring that goes on. And then, of course, we have this idea of ideology. Now, ideology is just kind of a set of values and beliefs, cultural beliefs, that kind of shape the cultural reality for individuals. But a conflict view of ideology talks about the dominant ideology, and that describes a set of cultural beliefs and practices that help to maintain powerful social, political, and economic interests. For example, in the United States of America, part of the ideology is that America is a meritocracy, where hard work is enough to get anybody anywhere. That may not be true. People trapped in generational poverty oftentimes have trouble breaking that cycle. But when we look at the dominant ideology, it helps to protect the people who already are rich if everybody thinks that that could be them. Because then they don't want to tax, they don't want taxes to be as high. Because what happens when I get rich? I'll be taxed just as badly. Another way that the dominant ideology helps us construct reality is that it produces stereotypes. And stereotypes, essentially unreliable generalization about all members of a particular group that do not recognize individual differences within the group. Now, most stereotypes are negative, but there can be positive stereotypes that can be just as damaging. All Asians are good at math and science. That's a stereotype. It's a positive stereotype, but it can be damaging to individuals because suppose you're an Asian American who struggles with math and science. If your teacher buys into that stereotype, instead of realizing that you're struggling and need help, they may just think you're lazy and not applying yourself. So even positive stereotypes can be damaging. Okay, the other idea is, with dominant ideology, is whose culture is being spread. 80% of the movies shown around the world in theaters as first-run movies, as the movies that you would see when you go out on, movie night, are produced in the United States of America. And a lot of movies that get produced in other countries tend to imitate U.S. movies. U.S. media gets widely imitated. Your book references the idea that The Apprentice is being copied on other shows. Donald Trump says you're fired. Free to leave, you're off. Those are other ones that other countries are using now, that where they're remaking a lot of U.S. media products. Now, what's interesting about that is that a lot of shows on the U.S. media are drawn from shows in Great Britain. Just something that's kind of interesting to me. Big Brother started in Great Britain. Idol started in Great Britain. It's not to say all of them, but a lot of them. In fact, they're remaking, if you may have seen Grace Point advertised on Fox, that's actually a remake of a series called Broadchurch that was produced in Great Britain. Okay. U.S. media relies on overseas market for program ideas and distribution. That's kind of the point I was making there. When we look at Survivor, Big Brother, Iron Chef, Hell's Kitchen, these shows all originated in other countries, but then we take them and change them, amp them up, and then redistribute them into the rest of the world. But television is moving away. More and more shows are being recognized from other countries. Cultural dissemination, dissolution, really references the idea of spreading culture on a global scale. Some nations that dislike the United States of America because we are trying to spread our culture so far and so fast around the world. Some nations feel that a loss of identity, that are feeling a loss of identity, may try to defend against the cultural invasion and may actually come to resent the United States of America for distributing their culture, their ideology. Again, this is the conflict perspective. Okay, I mentioned the digital divide, the digital gap. There is a digital gap that exists along a generational basis. That's the one I was referencing. Older people oftentimes may not keep up with new technologies. And so when it comes to the ways that younger generations, younger age cohorts are used to communicating, older people may not be up to date on those. Just personal anecdote here. It's happened with both my parents, my father and my mother, lamenting the fact that their grandchildren never seem to call them. And I told them both, different conversations, you really want to keep in touch with your grandchildren? You're going to have to get a Facebook page. Of course, now it's Instagram, Twitter, that kind of stuff. But at the time, I said, you're going to have to get a Facebook page, because if you want to know what's going on in Ariana or Connor, if you want to know what's going on in their lives, get a Facebook page. You will be able to keep in touch with them much easier that way than waiting for them to call. They were living on the other side of the digital divide. That's no longer true. They're both now on Facebook and actually keeping more in touch with other members of family through Facebook as well. Another way we can look at the digital divide is it's a divide on the basis of class. Class, of course, is based upon how much income you have, how much money you have. And so low-income groups tend to be on the other side of the digital divide. They might not have access to all the newest technology. Racial and ethnic minorities, because of the correlation between poverty and minority status. Rural residents a lot of times don't have access to, right now, of course, it's the 4G network. If you don't live in a major metropolitan urban area, you don't have access to a 4G network. And then citizens of developing countries all have less access to the latest technology. And of course, right now, internet and new media become essential to economic progress. If you want to become economically secure, you have to be conversant with the usage of a computer, tablet, smartphone, all this kind of stuff. Because anymore in a job that you may have, you're going to need to be able to use these new forms of media. But also on a national basis, on a state basis, a country basis, internet and new media are also essential for economic progress of nations. Okay. Feminists, similar viewpoint to conflict theorists. Mass media stereotype and misrepresent social reality, but focusing more on gender than on class, race, ethnicity. Women tend to be underrepresented. A lot of times women are still given stereotypical roles in media production, how often do women become saved by men? I mean, if we think about going all the way back into the 1930s, Lois Lane being saved by Superman. We still see this kind of thing going on. Emphasis on traditional sex roles, and it tends to normalize violence against women. Now, some of this may be changing, may be getting better, but if you think back to it, how many times in if you're a film noir fan, watching old bogey movies, how many times did Humphrey manhandle a woman, force a kiss on her, and then she kind of melts into his arms? And that became kind of normalized, the idea that no means yes, and all women want is for a man to force themselves on them. This normalizes violence and contributes to what we would call the culture of rape that tends to exist here in the United States. Feminists, we are seeing more strong roles for women on TV. We've seen some role reversal in the show, like Castle, where the female is actually the responsible, logical person, and the male is the more kind of free-thinking and less responsible, less logical, more juvenile character. So feminists have some cautious optimism about new media. Okay. Interactionists, remember, symbolic interactionism is a perspective that looks at shared meanings, understanding what people are trying to express. So they look at media on a micro level to see how what we see in the media shapes day-to-day social behavior. One of the things that interactionists can examine is how when we look at a TV show where, even if it's a sitcom type of TV show, if dad goes to work and mom stays home and takes care of the kids, even in this kind of modern time, that's perpetuating stereotypical views of gender. Interactionists also look at the rise of internet and how it facilitated new forms of communication and social interaction. In your textbook on page 147, you can look at how it's changed marketing. Traditional marketing, the advertiser would simply put an ad on TV, and it would go out there, and they would expect a certain return on that. In the internet age, your certain browsers and stuff actually gather information on your viewing habits, your shopping habits, and it creates a two-way street between you and the advertiser. You actually get specifically targeted for certain ads. This was the table I was discussing where we look at how status is conveyed by media products. You can find this in your textbook. Another table here looking at branding in the globe. When we take a look at this, what we're examining here are brands and the countries they originated in. Something like BlackBerry actually originated in Canada. But yeah, if you look here, you can see where brands originate. Some things that you might think of as being very American, obviously not. They originated in other countries. But if we look and see, there are a lot of United States brands that have spread throughout the world. Gender, from the conflict and feminist perspective. What is a network covering as far as sports? Well, men's sports tend to get covered much, much more, right? Okay, so when we're looking at some research that's going on today, diversity in reality TV. When we talk about reality TV, the original reality TV shows were game shows. It's where you saw real people in an artificial situation without scripted material. But when we look at reality TV today, it has broadened out substantially. Now, when you think about looking at reality TV, do you notice tension or conflict based on race, social class, or sex? When you watch certain shows, you may see this happening. This may be something that's going on at times. Again, when we think about reality TV, another question to think about: what does the popularity of reality TV shows tell us about our culture and society? Networks and media companies love reality TV shows because they are much cheaper to produce than scripted TV, where you're paying writers, directors, actors. Reality TV, you don't have to worry about paying a lot of that stuff. But the popularity of them says something about our culture and society. First of all, everybody loves to watch drama and conflict. Reality TV presents some of this to us. There may also be an element of, we love reality TV because we think, well, I could do that, and everybody may get their chance at their 15 minutes of fame. Global disconnect. Countries, high-income countries, are wired into the internet, okay, and wired in media-wise. But there are nations on the periphery that may be suffering some social and economic consequences. So when we think about that, it's more than just an inability to surf the net. If they're not connected into the global community, their growth will remain slow, and the well-being of the people, the lifestyle, living standard of the people will remain low. What factors might complicate efforts to remedy the global disconnect in developing nations? Unstable governments. There's all sorts of things that might contribute to that. Citizens who do become educated in those tend to migrate to high-income countries, creating what we call brain drain, where education skills, knowledge of people who are professionals would be much more valuable in the developing country from which they came than they are in, say, the U.S. economy here. Here's little illustration showing you the difference between traditional marketing and online marketing, like I was discussing. You see how it becomes kind of a two-way street between the advertiser and the consumer. As the consumer consumes, the advertiser is getting more information about buying habits, and then can target specific consumers with specific ads that they think those consumers would be more likely to purchase. When we check out this is just kind of a breakdown demographically of who's on the internet here in the United States of America. Men, women, roughly the same. Age, we can see, a sharp drop-off as we increase in age. Really, race and ethnicity does play a little bit into it. But a lot of that happens to be more because of living in poverty and impoverished areas and living in rural areas. If you look at income, you can see there's a strong correlation there. Education, people who are in college tend to use the internet much more, and who have graduated from college. I use the internet constantly. In fact, I'm using it right now to create this for you, this lecture for you. Urban and suburban, we see a slightly higher percentage than we do in rural areas. Okay, here's a breakdown of the sociological perspectives on mass media. When we look at the emphasis of the various perspectives that we've sort of covered in the lecture already. Functionalist looks at the functions and maybe dysfunction created by media, socialization, enforcement of social norms, conferral of status, promotion of consumption, narcotizing effect. Conflict looks at inequality created in and by media, gatekeeping, media monitoring, construction of reality, digital divide. Feminist perspective tends to focus on gender, misrepresentation, and differential impact. Interactionist looks at impact on social behavior. Also, one thing that I didn't really cover was that the interactionist looks at the way that friendship networks are created on the internet. How many people have a Facebook page where they have friends that they've never met face to face? How many people play online games where they've developed friendships with people they've never met face to face? Okay. Audience must be considered when we think about mass media. Family doesn't need an audience. Religion doesn't really need an audience. Mass media is distinguished from other social institutions by the necessary presence of an audience. If you're producing a television show and nobody's watching, what happens? Television show gets canceled. If you're writing a book and you self-publish and no one buys it, do you ever get an opportunity to publish another book? Well, no. So you need an audience for mass media. Which an audience is essentially an identifiable finite group or a much larger undefined group. Some things are produced specifically with certain people in mind. Others are not. A lot of the, like Dora the Explorer, SpongeBob, those are produced with an identifiable finite group, kids up to age X. Okay. When we talk about audience behavior, we've got this idea of what's an opinion leader. Someone who, through day-to-day personal contacts and communications, influences opinions and decisions of others. Opinion leaders encourage their relative friends and coworkers to think positively about particular people, maybe a candidate in political office. Members of an audience do not all interpret media in the same way, and an opinion leader can influence that. But despite the role of opinion leaders, some responses influenced by social characteristics or demographics like occupation, race, education, and income. Race caused different reactions to media more than gender and class, according to research by Darnell Hunt. Okay, we talk about this idea of a global village. McLuhan predicted the idea of a global village created by electronic media. We've seen that to a certain extent. Distance is no longer a factor in communication, is it? I mean, days of the Pony Express, it would be difficult to get a letter all the way from New York to Los Angeles because it had to be carried by horseback. Now, we've got digital streaming airwaves, digital streams that carry it for us. Instant messaging is possible around the world. Global torrent is a more apt metaphor, according to Todd Gitlin. So he believes that we're just inundated. Internet will increasingly reach directly into workplaces, schools, and homes. Well, we're seeing this happen, right? This is what's going on right now. Reference materials, data banks now accessible across national boundaries. You can go online, read Le Monde, which is a French newspaper. You can watch RT News online, which is Russian television news network. You can access data banks from universities around the world. Okay, this is on page 151 of your textbook. It's the idea of Al Jazeera, which is a news network out of Qatar. A lot of people have not heard of Al Jazeera, although it is becoming more popular. Al Jazeera presents a lot of news in a different light than it might be presented here in the U.S. Some questions to think about, of course. Do you find news outlets in the United States biased? And if so, which ones? You watch Fox News? Do you watch MSNBC? Do you watch CNN? They all have their own particular biases, right? But how do you judge something like that? You know, which one do you find the news more palatable from? There's also a new Al Hurra network going on. And this is something that is being supported by the U.S. government. But when we look at Al Jazeera, we think about Al Jazeera, they do offer differing viewpoints. They offer a different perspective on a lot of events. So does RT News, the Journal, which is German news magazine, Le Monde, which is French news, HK News, which is news out of Hong Kong, BBC World News. They're all news coming from all different kinds of countries right now. Okay. Media penetration in selected countries. This is just kind of looking at the different types of media. Personal computers, cell phones, telephone primary lines, right? Personal computers, look, even Canada outstrips us. France, cell phones. And these are rates per 100 people. More and more, increasingly, cell phones are becoming more common than landlines. In our household, my wife and I each have a cell phone. We don't even bother with a landline. So, do we have privacy? Do we have the right to privacy? If something is posted on your Facebook page, should it be considered private? Should employers be able to ask for your passwords to social media in order to look at your Facebook page before they hire you? Okay. Zettabytes, huge amount. It's 1 trillion gigabytes. 2010, humans added 1.2 zettabytes of digital information into the world's already huge data library. Technology makes it easier to retrieve and store information about private individuals. As I said, many companies now are actually wanting to get access to your Facebook page, to your social media pages prior to hiring you as part of the interview process. But there are violations of privacy by criminals and by companies and by governments and by so on and so on and so on. So when we think about this, the complex issue of privacy and censorship are really about what we would call cultural lag. And cultural lag is when values, beliefs, and behaviors, which are our non-material culture, are struggling to catch up with new conditions created by our material culture, in this case, the internet, computers, and technology. Now, functionalists look at the internet as creating benefit for society. Okay, it enables people to stay in communication more. It facilitates faster communication. So functionalists generally have a favorable view of the internet. Conflict theorists looked at unequal access. They also look at powerful groups using the internet for their own benefit, and not necessarily like invading privacy in the sense of trying to discover secrets, but even gathering information on your shopping habits because you purchase stuff online. Is that private? It's just something to consider, because companies and corporations want to gather information about your shopping habits, as we talked about, to specifically target advertising at you, in the hope that it will spur more purchases if they find the items that you want. So we have this Electronic Communications Privacy Act in 1986, essentially outlawed the surveillance of telephone calls except with a warrant. However, at this point in time, because of the Patriot Act, federal agencies are now freer to gather data electronically. All they have to do is invoke the Patriot Act, which circumvents certain civil rights. We're going to see some of this being played out in court. Most types of online monitoring not yet tested in court. Nobody has actually filed a lawsuit against the NSA for the metadata they're gathering right now. People are outraged by it, but so far it has not made it into court. It may, and we may see it play out. Tracking and surveillance may pose a greater threat to society than online piracy, which is, for media companies, the important thing, right? You can't download songs for free. You shouldn't be able to watch movies, first-run movies for free. As far as the media companies are concerned, online piracy is the greatest threat that the internet poses. For the average citizen, tracking and surveillance may pose a greater threat. Okay, this concludes our discussion for today. I hope you have, or if you're listening to this, I hope this has been beneficial for you. We will once again be meeting next Wednesday to discuss further chapter of the textbook. We will be meeting on 9/10/1. Wow, next Wednesday is actually October. Wow, the time is getting away from me. So the 1st of October, 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, 1:30 Central Standard Time is when you can tune in. If you do tune in at that point in time, you will be able to ask me questions in the chat box.